For most people, buying a soccer team seems like the ultimate dream. Owning a stadium, having famous players, and controlling a globally recognized brand. But there is a problem that almost nobody knows about. The biggest clubs on the planet are not money-making machines. In reality, many of them are money-spending machines. Some owners lose hundreds of millions every season, and yet they continue competing to buy them. This raises the big question: why would anyone invest a fortune in a business that appears to be designed to lose money? The answer reveals one of the most fascinating investment strategies in the modern world. Last season, Chelsea recorded record revenues of £490 million, but at the same time suffered a pre-tax loss of £262 million, the largest deficit in Premier League history. And this is not an exception. Between 75% and 90% of professional soccer teams report operating losses every year. But something is changing. Traditional billionaire owners are slowly being replaced by investment funds, private equity firms, and countries with enormous financial resources. And clearly they are not doing it simply because they love the sport. By the end, you will understand how much it really costs to buy a soccer team, why investors are entering this market, and how some owners manage to build fortunes even while losing millions. Because before buying a club, you need to understand something important. Soccer clubs are not designed to maximize profits. They are designed to maximize victories. What you are really buying is not just players or a stadium. You are buying a global brand with millions of supporters, a massive entertainment engine, and an emotional connection that can last for generations. In this business, winning increases the value of everything. More trophies mean more fans, better television deals, and sponsors willing to pay millions. But before winning championships, you have to achieve something much more difficult: buying a club. And this is where the prices start becoming unbelievably high. If you wanted to create a team from scratch, Major League Soccer in the United States would be one of the few options available. In 2023, billionaire Roman Mansour paid a record expansion fee of $500 million to create San Diego FC. But just 10 years earlier, Los Angeles FC had paid only $110 million to enter the league. And if you are David Beckham, thanks to a special agreement with MLS, you could have obtained a franchise for only $25 million. Although there is an important detail: that amount only buys your place in the league. It does not include players, a stadium, or infrastructure. But if you truly want to be at the top of world soccer, there is a much more prestigious destination: the English Premier League. The most powerful soccer league on the planet generated €7.4 billion in 2024, almost twice as much as the next biggest European competition. However, here you cannot simply create a new team. The Premier League operates through a closed promotion and relegation system. That is why the only way to enter the highest level of English soccer is by buying something that already exists. Most owners begin by purchasing a championship club, the second division of English soccer. But if you go down a few more divisions, you can find true opportunities. That is exactly what Reynolds and Rob McElhenney did in 2021, when they bought Wrexham AFC, a Welsh 5th division club, for practically nothing. Although they later had to invest millions to rebuild it, they transformed a small purchase into a project with enormous growth potential. But if you do not want to spend years fighting for promotions, there is a much more direct option: buying a Premier League team. The problem is that these opportunities appear very rarely, and when they do appear, the prices are completely different. In 2003, Roman Abramovich bought Chelsea for £140 million, creating a new model of clubs financed by billionaire owners. 5 years later, Sheikh Mansour bought Manchester City for around £210 million. And in 2021, Saudi Arabia's public investment fund acquired 80% of Newcastle United for £305 million. But buying the club was only the beginning. After signing the documents and sitting in the executive box, the least exciting part begins: paying the bills. The biggest expense for any owner is player salaries. This is the black hole of soccer finances, capable of consuming more than 70% of a team's revenue in a single season. An average Premier League player earns around £80,000 per week, but global superstars can multiply that figure. Erling Haaland, for example, earns more than £500,000 per week, representing more than £27 million per year for a single player. And salaries are not the only problem. Every transfer also includes huge payments to agents. In a single year, Premier League clubs paid a record £460 million in agent commissions. Chelsea alone spent £65 million. To prevent clubs from spending without control, UEFA created financial limits that regulate wages, managers, agents, and transfers. The main rule establishes that these costs cannot exceed 70% of operating revenue. In addition, the Premier League has its own system to limit accumulated losses. But here another interesting element appears. The biggest clubs do not only spend money, they also use financial strategies to keep their accounts balanced. One of the most common strategies is amortization. If you buy a player for £60 million with a 5-year contract, the entire cost does not appear in a single year. Instead, it is divided into accounting expenses of £12 million per season, making massive investments appear much more manageable. Even stadiums can become financial tools. Some clubs have sold their stadiums to companies connected to the same owners in order to record accounting profits and then lease them back. That is what Newcastle United did with St James's Park, an operation that allowed them to transform a possible loss of £98 million into a recorded profit of £34 million. But now comes the big question. After spending hundreds of millions to keep a team competitive, where does all that money start coming back from? The answer lies in the enormous revenue streams that exist within soccer. The first and most consistent source is broadcasting rights, which represent approximately 30% of a club's revenue. The Premier League sells television rights for its 20 teams as a global package, and then distributes that money among the clubs. 50% of domestic revenue is distributed equally among all teams. Another 25% depends on league position, where every place in the table can represent tens of millions of pounds. And there is still another portion of money that can completely change a club's economy: how many times a team appears on television. Finally, there is another part of television rights known as facility fees, which depend on how many times your matches are selected to be broadcast live. International broadcasting rights also generate huge amounts of money, although final revenues depend on the value of the television contract and the position you finish in the table. In 2025, Liverpool received £176 million solely from broadcasting rights. Broadcasting revenue after winning the league, while even Southampton, despite finishing last, received £106 million. But although television helps cover the enormous expenses, the true financial engine of the biggest clubs comes from commercial revenue, which represents approximately between 50% and 60% of their total income. This includes sponsors, brand partnerships, stadium naming rights, and official merchandise sales. The best example is Real Madrid. During the 2024-2025 season, the club surpassed €1,100 million in revenue, becoming the first soccer club in history to exceed that figure. Nearly €600 million came exclusively from its commercial operations. Adidas pays around €120 million per season to appear on their jersey, and together with other sponsors such as Emirates and HP, their commercial agreements reach approximately €260 million annually. In addition, merchandise sales represent another massive business. Last season, Real Madrid generated nearly €200 million from merchandise, driven by stars such as Mbappe and Bellingham. But there is still another source of income: the fans inside the stadium. In the Premier League, a ticket costs around £74 on average, but having a large stadium can create a huge difference. Liverpool, thanks to its larger stadium capacity, generates approximately £1,200,000 more per match than Chelsea. Over the course of an entire season, that difference can exceed £30 million. And modern stadiums are no longer just places where matches are played. They have become entertainment centers with restaurants, hotels, concerts, and sporting events throughout the year. Real Madrid's Santiago Bernabeu generated around €233 million through matchday activities, in addition to additional revenue from concerts, NFL games, and stadium tours. Tottenham, with one of the most advanced stadiums in England, generates around £85 million per year from non-soccer events alone. But there is one final strategy that only a few clubs have mastered: finding talent before anyone else. Discovering unknown players, developing them, and selling them for 10 or 20 times more than what they cost can become a massive profit-generating machine. Brighton is the best example. They bought Moises Caicedo from Ecuadorian soccer for £4,400,000 in 2021 and sold him to Chelsea 2 years later for £115 million. They also bought Alexis McAllister for £7 million and sold him to Liverpool for around £35 million. Marc Cucurella arrived from Getafe for £15 million and was sold to Chelsea for £62 million. These operations helped Brighton achieve a pre-tax profit of £122 million in 2023. the largest profit recorded in a single season by any club in English soccer history. So when you combine television revenue, sponsorships, stadiums and player sales, it seems like a soccer club has many ways to make money. But here is where the great contradiction appears. Even the most successful clubs in the world barely generate profits. After surpassing €1,100,000,000 in revenue, Real Madrid finished that season with an after-tax profit of only €24 million. That means that even during the greatest financial year in soccer history, its profit margin was only 1.2%. And that number reveals the real question that remains unanswered. If clubs generate billions but produce almost no profits, then how do their owners actually make money? So the big question appears, how does someone who owns a soccer club actually make money? The answer is simple, by thinking long-term. Owners do not buy clubs looking for massive profits every season, but by increasing the value of the asset over time. The best example is Roman Abramovich. When he bought Chelsea in 2003 for £140 million, he later invested more than £1,500 million into the club. But in 2022, the team was sold for £4,250 million. His ownership stake represented an approximate profit of £860 million. But not everyone follows that path. Reynolds and Rob McElhenney used a different strategy, buying cheaply and building value. Thanks to the exposure from their television show, Wrexham attracted major sponsors and increased its brand value 50 times in less than 3 years. Their revenue grew from £1,100,000 in 2021 to £33,300,000 in 2025. In 2024, an investment from the Allen family valued the club at £100 million. Another extraordinary case is Inter Miami. Thanks to a special clause in David Beckham's contract with LA Galaxy, he was able to acquire an MLS expansion franchise for $25 million. Years later, with the arrival of stars such as Lionel Messi, the club reached a valuation of $1,450 million, becoming one of the biggest increases in value in league history. And this is exactly the real reason why major investors buy soccer clubs. They are not just buying a team, they are buying a global brand with millions of followers, extremely loyal customers, and a market where entering is almost impossible. As long as the club continues winning, its value increases, and when the right moment arrives, the owner can sell it for a much higher amount than what they originally paid. Private equity firms understood this strategy years ago, and that is why traditional local owners are slowly being replaced by international investment funds. For them, soccer appears to be an undervalued asset. In 2025, the NFL generated more than $24 billion in league revenue. However, despite soccer having a global audience of approximately 3,500,000,000 people, the Premier League is still behind several major American sports leagues in economic terms. For many investors, this represents an opportunity, buying a global asset before it reaches its full potential. But not everyone buys clubs only to make money. For some countries with enormous financial resources, soccer also represents influence, reputation and international power. The acquisitions of Manchester City by Abu Dhabi, Paris Saint-Germain by Qatar, and Newcastle United by Saudi Arabia show that some clubs operate as much more than simple sports investments. All of this explains why the profile of soccer owners has changed dramatically. In 2005, 78 of the 98 clubs belonging to Europe's 5 major leagues had local owners. By 2023, that number had fallen to 56, a reduction of 40% in less than 20 years. That space was taken by investment funds and financial groups capable of absorbing losses for years while waiting for a massive future return. By the end of 2025, more than 345 clubs around the world were part of multi-club ownership networks, and nearly half of the teams belonging to Europe's 5 major leagues were already connected to some type of investment portfolio. And there you have it, the real business behind soccer. Owners are not only buying matches, players or trophies, they are buying emotional assets that can increase in value for decades. If you have a few $1 billion available, maybe you can buy a club and wait for that big payday. But if you do not, then the best option is probably to sit alongside the rest of us and simply enjoy the game.